Then please fetch the owner.
My lady, you've finally come home.
The steward didn't even look up before dismissing her. Go back to the servants' entrance, he said coldly. The owner of Kingshollow Estate doesn't entertain beggars. The young woman didn't argue. She simply brushed the dust from her travel cloak and replied, "Then please, fetch the owner." The steward laughed so loudly that nearby guards joined him. "I've served the owner of Kingshollow for 20 years, he sneered. "If there were a lady of this estate, I would know her." She met his eyes with an almost heartbreaking calm. "You should." A strange silence settled over the courtyard. Then the old gardener, who had been trimming roses nearby, dropped his shears. His hands began to tremble. He stared at the young woman's face as though he had seen a ghost. Before anyone could ask why, he fell to one knee and whispered words that turned every head in the courtyard. "My lady, you've finally come home." The old gardener's voice was barely louder than the wind. "My lady, you've finally come home." For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then laughter erupted across the courtyard. Steward Lionel Graves shook his head with open amusement. "Edgar," he said, folding his hands behind his back, "you're nearly 75. It seems age has finally clouded your eyes." The old gardener slowly rose to his feet, never taking his gaze from the young woman. "No," he whispered. "I would know those eyes anywhere." Lionel's smile disappeared. "And exactly who do you believe she is?" The gardener swallowed. "Lady Selene Ashridge." The courtyard fell silent. Even the horses seemed to stop breathing. Then just as quickly the silence broke into mocking laughter. "Lady Selene?" One guard scoffed. "The child who died in the Ashridge fire?" Another servant crossed himself. "I heard there wasn't even enough left to bury." Everyone knows the Ashridge bloodline ended 22 years ago. Lionel looked at the woman before him again. She stood quietly, making no attempt to defend herself. No anger. No fear. Only patience. Finally, Lionel chuckled. "Do you hear them?" She nodded gently. "I do. And yet you claim nothing." "I have learned that truth does not become stronger simply because it is spoken louder." His brows tightened. Her answer unsettled him more than any argument could have. She spoke like someone accustomed to being obeyed. Yet nothing about her appearance suggested nobility. Her cloak had faded from long travel. Dust covered her boots. A single leather satchel hung across her shoulder. No jewels. No embroidered crest. No servants. Nothing that announced wealth. Only quiet dignity. Lionel stepped closer. "If you are not an impostor, prove your identity." Selene met his gaze. "I did not come to prove who I am." "Then why are you here?" She looked beyond him, toward the grand manor rising above the gardens. "I came because someone sent for me." Murmurs rippled through the gathered servants. Lionel frowned. "No one from Kingshollow summoned you." "They did." "Who?" Instead of answering, Selene reached into her satchel. Every guard instinctively rested a hand on his sword. She slowly withdrew an old parchment sealed with deep crimson wax. The royal seal. Conversation stopped instantly. Lionel stared. "Where did you get that?" "It was delivered to me." "By whom?" "A messenger bearing the king's colors." His face hardened. "Let me see it." She gently pulled the document back before he could touch it. "I'm afraid I cannot." His jaw clenched. "You refuse a lawful request?" "I refuse an unlawful one." Her calmness only fueled his irritation. "That letter concerns Kingshollow Estate." "It does." "Then I have every right to inspect it." "No," Selene replied. "Only the person named inside has that right." "And who is named inside?" She looked at the wax seal for a brief moment. "I haven't opened it." Lionel blinked. "You traveled hundreds of miles." "Without reading it?" "My guardian told me it was to be opened only after I arrived at Kingshollow." The old gardener suddenly inhaled sharply. "A royal summons?" he whispered. Lionel ignored him. "You expect me to believe you've carried an unopened royal letter across half the kingdom?" "I don't expect you to believe anything." "Then why come?" "Because promises matter." Something in her voice caused the elderly gardener's eyes to glisten. She sounded exactly like her father. Lord Adrian Ashridge had once spoken those very words. A promise is a man's honor long after his voice is gone. Only 3 people had heard him say that. His wife, his daughter, and Edgar. The old gardener's heart pounded. Could it truly be her? No, it was impossible. Yet every word she spoke awakened memories buried for decades. Lionel finally lost what remained of his patience. Enough. He turned toward the guards. Escort this woman off the estate. Neither guard moved. They exchanged uncertain glances, not because they believed her story, but because of the royal seal. No soldier wished to be remembered as the fool who laid hands on a messenger carrying the king's authority. Lionel noticed their hesitation. His voice became cold. That was an order. Reluctantly, the guard stepped toward Selene. She neither resisted nor retreated. Instead, she lifted her eyes toward the towering windows of Kingshollow Manor. High above, behind a curtain in the eastern tower, someone had been watching the entire exchange. And as Selene was about to be escorted away, the curtain moved. A shadow disappeared from the window. Someone inside the manor had recognized her. Do you think Lionel is simply a proud steward? Or is he hiding something much darker? Don't answer too quickly. The moment the curtain fell back into place, the figure behind it vanished. No one in the courtyard noticed. No one except Lady Selene. She had seen only a shadow, but something about the movement stirred a memory she could not quite grasp. As a child, she had often watched someone stand at that very window, looking over the estate each morning before the household awoke. For a fleeting instant, it felt as though the past had reached through the years. Then the guards closed in. "My lady," Edgar whispered urgently. "Please, don't resist." Selene smiled faintly. "I have no intention of resisting." The guards stopped a respectful distance away. Neither wished to touch a woman carrying a sealed royal letter. One of them cleared his throat. If you would come with us." Lionel's face darkened. "I said escort her off the estate, not invite her for a stroll." The younger guard shifted uneasily. "Steward Graves, she bears the king's seal. And until that seal is opened, it means nothing." Selene spoke before either man could reply. "I'll leave if that is truly your wish." Lionel folded his arms. "It is. But before I do." She looked directly at him. "I ask only one question." He sighed impatiently. "Make it brief. Who lives in the eastern tower?" The question caught him off guard. His expression flickered for the first time since she arrived. "That is none of your concern." "I wasn't asking out of curiosity." "Then why ask?" "Because someone was watching us." Lionel laughed. "You imagine things." "I rarely do." He took a deliberate step closer. "You seem remarkably interested in matters that do not concern you. And you seem remarkably determined to keep people from asking questions." A few servants lowered their eyes, pretending not to hear. Lionel forced a smile. "The eastern tower has been closed for years." Edgar suddenly spoke. "That isn't true." Every head turned. Lionel's voice became dangerously quiet. "What did you say?" The old gardener swallowed. I only meant." "You meant to contradict me." Edgar looked at Selene. "No, sir." Lionel's stare lingered on the old man before returning to the young woman. "You've caused enough disturbance for one morning." He turned sharply. "Search her belongings." Selene's calm expression finally changed. Not to fear. To disappointment. "I wouldn't advise that." Lionel raised an eyebrow. "Is that a threat?" "No." It sounded like one. "It was a warning." He smirked. "Search the satchel." One guard hesitated. "Sir." "Now." Reluctantly, the guard reached toward the worn leather satchel hanging at Selene's side. Before his hand could touch it, a powerful voice echoed across the courtyard. "Stand down." The command rolled through the estate like distant thunder. Every servant froze. Every guard immediately stepped back. Even Lionel stiffened. From the front entrance of Kingshollow Manor descended an elderly gentleman dressed in dark blue robes embroidered with the royal crest. His silver hair was neatly combed, and despite his age, every step carried quiet authority. Edgar's eyes widened. "It can't be." The man reached the bottom of the stairs. Without acknowledging Lionel, he walked directly to Selene. Then, to everyone's astonishment, he bowed. Not a polite nod. Not a courteous incline of the head. A full, formal bow, the kind reserved for the highest-ranking nobles in the kingdom. "My lady," he said, "I feared you might never come." The courtyard fell into stunned silence. Lionel stared in disbelief. "Chancellor Beaumont?" The elderly man slowly turned. His eyes, though calm, carried the weight of royal authority. "Steward Lionel Graves." Lionel quickly bowed. "I wasn't informed of your visit. I did not come to see you." He looked back at Selene. "I came to fulfill a promise made 22 years ago." A chill swept through the gathered servants. 22 years. The same number of years since the Ashridge family had supposedly perished. Lionel forced a nervous laugh. There must be some misunderstanding. There is. The Chancellor's voice remained steady. It is yours. He extended both hands towards Selene. My lady. The time has finally come to open the king's letter. Selene looked down at the sealed parchment she had carried across the kingdom without breaking the wax. For years, her guardian had told her only one thing. When the day comes, do not open it until you stand inside Kingshollow Estate. Only then will the truth belong to you. She had obeyed. Now, surrounded by stunned servants, trembling guards, an old gardener with tears in his eyes, and a steward whose confidence was beginning to crumble, she carefully broke the royal seal. As the parchment unfolded in her hands, a single folded document slipped from inside and landed on the stone courtyard. The Chancellor's face changed the moment he saw it. He whispered almost to himself, I prayed that document still existed. Selene bent to pick it up. Across the top, written in elegant royal script, were 5 words that made her heart stop. The last testament of Adrian Ashridge. No one in the courtyard dared to breathe. Lady Selene stared at the aged document resting in her hands. The parchment was yellowed with time, yet the crimson ribbon binding it remained untouched, preserved as though it had been waiting for this very moment. Her fingers trembled. Not from fear. From recognition. She had seen that ribbon before. As a little girl, she had watched her father seal important family papers with the very same crimson silk before placing them inside a carved oak chest in his study. For a moment, she was no longer standing in the courtyard of Kingshollow Estate. She was 6 years old again, laughing as her father lifted her onto his desk because she insisted she wanted to help him rule the world. He had laughed and kissed her forehead. No, little star, he had said. You needn't rule the world. If you can rule your own heart with kindness, the world will gladly follow. The memory disappeared as quickly as it came. Selene drew a slow breath. Then she carefully unfolded the testament. The courtyard remained utterly silent. Only the rustling parchment could be heard. Her eyes moved across the first lines. Then they stopped. She blinked once. Twice. Her lips parted, but no words came. The Chancellor studied her face with quiet concern. My lady? She looked up. This. She swallowed. This cannot be right. Lionel seized the opportunity. There you see, he said, forcing a laugh. Even she admits there's been some mistake. The Chancellor held out his hand. May I? Selene silently passed him the document. The old statesman adjusted his spectacles and began to read. With every line, the color slowly drained from his face. When he reached the final page, he closed his eyes for a long moment. Then he whispered, By the crown. Edgar's hands began to shake. What does it say? The Chancellor looked first at Selene, then at the crowd gathered in the courtyard. Finally, he folded the document with great care. Before I answer. He turned toward Lionel. I have a question for you, Steward Graves. Lionel straightened. Of course. When you accepted stewardship of Kingshollow Estate 12 years ago, did you ever read the original royal charter? Lionel frowned. I reviewed every document relevant to the estate. That wasn't my question. The steward hesitated. No. The Chancellor nodded slowly. I thought as much. Lionel forced another smile. With respect, Chancellor, I'm not certain what ancient paperwork has to do with this woman. It has everything to do with her. The smile vanished. The Chancellor continued. Tell me, Steward. Who told you that Kingshollow belonged to Duke Aldrin? Lionel answered immediately. It has belonged to the Duke's family for generations. Has it? Everyone knows that. The Chancellor's voice remained calm. Everyone believed that. The distinction struck the courtyard like a clap of thunder. Murmurs spread among the servants. What does he mean? Did the Duke never own Kingshollow? Impossible. Lionel's confidence began to falter. There must be some misunderstanding. There has been. The Chancellor looked at the ancient manor behind them. A misunderstanding lasting more than 20 years. He slowly turned back to Selene. Your father entrusted the crown with this document on the night before the fire. Selene's heart pounded. My father knew? He suspected. Suspected what? That someone intended to destroy House Ashridge. A gasp escaped Edgar. No. The Chancellor nodded solemnly. Lord Adrian believed powerful enemies were moving against his family. So he wrote his final testament and placed it under royal protection until his daughter could safely return. Selene felt the ground shift beneath her feet. My guardian, He knew all this? He knew only enough to keep you alive. The Chancellor's eyes softened. Had anyone discovered you survived, you would have shared your parents' fate. A heavy silence settled over the courtyard. For the first time since she had arrived, Selene felt the true weight of the life she had been forced to leave behind. She had spent 22 years believing fate had stolen her family. Now she realized someone had tried to erase them. Before she could speak again, hurried footsteps echoed from inside the manor. A young maid burst through the great entrance, breathless. Steward Graves. Lionel turned sharply. What is it? The Duke. She struggled to catch her breath. The Duke has awakened. Everyone froze. The maid looked at Selene with frightened eyes. He says he wishes to see Lady Selene Ashridge. The courtyard erupted into stunned whispers. Lionel's face turned as pale as marble. Because only 3 people knew the Duke had been bedridden for nearly a year. And according to every physician in the kingdom, the old man hadn't spoken a single clear sentence. In almost 6 months. No one moved. The young maid stood trembling at the foot of the manor steps, her face drained of color. I swear those were his exact words, she whispered. He said, bring Lady Selene Ashridge to me, at once. A murmur swept through the courtyard. Servants exchanged uneasy glances. Several crossed themselves. One of the guards whispered, but His Grace hasn't recognized anyone in months. Another replied, he doesn't even remember his own physicians. Edgar's eyes filled with tears. He remembers her. Steward Lionel Graves spun toward the Chancellor. This is impossible. The Chancellor regarded him steadily. No, Steward. What if this is some elaborate deception? What if someone coached the Duke? The Duke has scarcely spoken for half a year. But enough. The Chancellor's voice carried the quiet authority of the crown. The Duke has requested Lady Selene. He turned toward Selene and bowed his head. My lady, if you are willing. She looked toward the towering manor. For 22 years, she had imagined returning to this place. She had imagined anger. She had imagined grief. She had imagined confronting those responsible for her family's ruin. She had never imagined walking through its doors to meet a dying duke who somehow remembered her name. Taking a slow breath, she nodded. I'll see him. The grand doors of Kingshollow opened with a deep groan. As Selene stepped inside, memories flooded over her. The scent of polished oak. The marble floors that reflected the morning light. Portraits of generations long gone. She had walked these halls as a little girl, chasing butterflies that wandered in through the open windows while her mother gently scolded her for running indoors. Now the laughter had vanished. The manor felt quieter. Older. As though it too had been waiting. Edgar followed several steps behind. The Chancellor walked beside her. Lionel trailed them reluctantly, unable to hide the growing unease on his face. They climbed the sweeping staircase toward the eastern tower. The same tower Selene had noticed from the courtyard. The same tower Lionel had insisted was abandoned. She glanced at him. You said no one lived here. Lionel lowered his eyes. The Duke ordered that no one speak of the eastern tower. And you obeyed. I serve the estate. No, Selene replied softly. You served convenience. Lionel had no answer. The maid opened a heavy oak door. A warm fire burned quietly inside. Sunlight filtered through tall windows, illuminating shelves lined with ancient books and maps of the duchy. Near the window stood a large bed. Upon it lay Duke Cedric Kingsley. Age had reduced the once powerful noble to little more than skin and bone. His silver hair rested against the pillow. His breathing was shallow. Yet the moment Selene entered, his tired eyes opened. For the first time in many months, they were clear. He smiled. Not the smile of a duke greeting a visitor. The smile of an old friend finally keeping a promise. You have your mother's eyes, he whispered. Selene stepped closer. You knew my parents? A faint chuckle escaped him. Knew them? They were my dearest friends. The room fell silent. Lionel stared in disbelief. The Duke slowly raised a trembling hand. Selene took it gently. I've waited 22 years, he said. To tell you the truth. Her heart pounded. What truth? He closed his eyes briefly, gathering the little strength he had left. The fire was never an accident. The words struck the room like lightning. Edgar covered his mouth. The Chancellor bowed his head as though hearing aloud what he had long suspected. Selene's fingers tightened around the Duke's frail hand. Who did it? The old man's breathing grew heavier. There were men who wanted what your father possessed. My father's manor? The Duke slowly shook his head. No. My father's title? Again he shook his head. A single tear rolled down the old man's cheek. They wanted Kingshollow. Selene frowned. But father never owned Kingshollow. The Duke looked directly into her eyes. Then, with the last of his strength, he whispered the words that changed everything. No, child. I merely cared for it. A stunned silence filled the room. The Duke swallowed painfully before continuing. Your father was the true lord of Kingshollow. And you, his voice nearly faded to nothing, were born its rightful lady. The room seemed to stop. Lionel stumbled backward until he struck the wall. His face had turned completely white, because if the Duke was telling the truth, then for the past 22 years, every order Lionel had given, every account he had signed, every decision he had made, had been on an estate that never legally belonged to the family he served. And outside the chamber, hidden beyond the half-open door, someone had been listening to every word. Someone who now realized that if Lady Selene claimed Kingshollow, their own carefully guarded secret would be exposed forever. Outside the Duke's chamber, a floorboard creaked. The sound was faint, so faint that no one but Selene noticed. Years of living in hiding had taught her to hear what others ignored. She slowly turned toward the half-open door. Who is there? Silence. The Chancellor stepped forward and pulled the door wide open. The corridor was empty. Only a servant's candle flickered in the draught. But Edgar bent slowly and picked something up from the polished floor. A silver signet ring. Its crest was unfamiliar to Selene. The Chancellor's face darkened the moment he saw it. I know this seal. Lionel looked at the ring, and all the color drained from his face. No. The Chancellor held it up. The House of Redwine. Edgar whispered, I haven't seen that crest since the night of the fire. Selene looked between them. What does it mean? The Chancellor's voice was grave. It means someone connected to the conspiracy has been inside Kingshollow. At those words, Duke Cedric closed his eyes. He no longer had the strength to speak, but he gave the slightest nod. It was answer enough. An hour later, every senior servant, steward, and officer of Kingshollow Estate gathered in the Great Hall. 4 years, it had been the place where taxes were counted, harvests celebrated, and judgments delivered. Today it would witness history. The Chancellor stood before the assembled household. In his hands rested the King's sealed letter and Lord Adrian Ashridge's testament. By the authority of His Majesty's crown, he declared, these documents have remained under royal protection for 22 years. His voice echoed through the hall. They were sealed to protect the life of one child. Every eye turned toward Selene. She stood quietly at the front of the hall. Not upon the dais. Not on the Duke's chair. Simply among the people. The Chancellor continued. Many have believed that Kingshollow Estate belonged to Duke Cedric Kingsley. He paused. That belief was false. A wave of whispers swept through the room. The Royal Charter, signed 23 years ago, transferred Kingshollow Estate, its lands, its villages, and all hereditary rights into the care of Lord Adrian Ashridge. Lionel closed his eyes. He already knew what came next. When Lord Adrian and his lady were murdered, the charter required that every title, every holding, and every right pass to his only surviving child. The Chancellor looked at Selene. Lady Selene Ashridge. He raised the ancient charter high enough for everyone to see. Therefore, by the laws of the kingdom, Lady Selene Ashridge has been the lawful owner of Kingshollow Estate for the past 22 years. Silence. No one moved. No one spoke. It was as though the walls themselves were absorbing the truth. Then one by one, the household began to kneel. First Edgar. Then the guards. Then the maids. Then the cooks. Then every servant in the hall. The sound of knees touching the stone floor echoed like rolling thunder. My lady. Welcome home. Tears filled Selene's eyes. Not because she had gained an estate, but because she had found the home she thought she had lost forever. Only one man remained standing. Lionel Graves. His shoulders sagged beneath the weight of 22 years of pride. He stepped forward slowly. Then, without being asked, he removed the steward's seal from around his neck and placed it on the floor before Selene. My lady. His voice broke. I judged you by your cloak. I measured your worth by your appearance. I denied you entry to your own home. He lowered himself onto one knee. I have no excuse. I ask only that you judge me more fairly than I judged you. The hall fell silent. Everyone waited. Selene looked at the man who had humiliated her only hours before. She could have stripped him of everything. She could have had him imprisoned. Instead, she asked a question. When you first came to Kingshollow? Lionel looked up. Were you an arrogant man? He frowned. No. What changed? He answered honestly. I forgot that this estate belonged to duty. Not to me. Selene nodded slowly. That is how pride begins. She picked up the steward's seal. For a long moment, everyone believed she would hand it back. Instead, she placed it in the Chancellor's hands. Until a full inquiry is completed, she said, Kingshollow shall have no steward. Then she turned back to Lionel. You are relieved of your office. His head bowed. I understand. But, Selene continued, you are not relieved of your chance to become a better man. He looked at her in disbelief. I won't repay arrogance with cruelty. If you truly wish to atone, remain at Kingshollow, not as its steward, but as a servant to the people you once overlooked. Earn back respect the same way it is lost, one choice at a time. Lionel's eyes filled with tears. For the first time in many years. He bowed not out of duty but out of humility. 3 months later, Kingshollow Estate had changed. The gates remained open to every traveler until sunset. No guest was judged by clothing. No servant was ignored because of rank. Edgar became master of the gardens, restoring every rose bed that Lady Selene's mother had once loved. Lionel worked quietly beside the laborers, saying little and listening much. And in the eastern tower, a portrait of Lord Adrian Ashridge and his family was returned to its rightful place. Beneath it, Lady Selene ordered a single inscription carved into stone. A home is never truly owned by the one who holds its keys, but by the one who protects the dignity of everyone who enters its gates. Years later, travelers would ask why the Lady of Kingshollow often greeted strangers herself. The oldest servants would simply smile. Because they remembered the day a weary young woman arrived in a dusty cloak, asked someone to fetch the owner, and quietly revealed that she had been the woman who owned it all. As the great doors of Kingshollow closed behind Lady Selene, one question lingered in every heart. If you had stood where Steward Lionel Graves stood, would you have recognized true nobility, or judged it by a dusty cloak? How many opportunities, friendships, or acts of kindness have we missed because we decided someone's worth before learning their story? If this story touched your heart, tell me in the comments. What lesson did Lady Selene's return teach you the most?